Hi everybody, welcome back to the course. We're moving into a new section today, and over the next 6 lectures we're going to be looking at semi-formal letters. So we're going to, as usual, read this one out here and work out what it's all about. So you and your family have recently moved to an English-speaking country. The person who lives in the apartment above you plays a musical instrument, and the noise causes you and your family some problems. Write a letter to this person. In your letter, introduce yourself and give details of the noise. Describe the problems it is causing you and your family, and suggest what action the person could take. So, semi-formal letters now, but all the usual guidelines apply. So we're going to begin by looking for the keywords. So maybe you can think for yourself, what are the key words here? What I believe are, we have you and your family. It's very important. We're not just thinking about ourselves here, but we're thinking about our family as well. That's going to dictate the content of the letter. So we have recently moved. Recently moved, that could be key. We can reference the point that it's a recent move in the letter to an English-speaking country. That might come up, the fact that it's English speaking. I feel like it's just added there to make the point that we're writing in English. See, the person who lives in the apartment above you. So it's the person who lives in the apartment above you. That above is very important. That is going to dictate some of the content. So if you were in the exam, I would want you to underline the word above twice, just to emphasize that. So I'm going to highlight it and underline it. They play a musical instrument, also of course very important. It's not just any old disturbance, it's a specific kind of disturbance. And the noise causes you and your family some problems. So we have noise, again you and your family. It's not just that you've all moved, but it actually is causing you all some problems. So there's a lot of highlighted language here. And it's important because we need to reference almost all of these points. We should try not to leave anything out. We're writing a letter to this person, and in doing so we're going to introduce ourselves and we're going to give details of the noise. Pretty self-explanatory, so we'll just put all of that there. We're going to describe the problems, and again another key aspect here, it is causing you, the problems to you and your family. It's not enough to explain that it's causing you to lose sleep at night, but what is it doing to your family as well? And then we can suggest what action the person could take. Notice the verb there is suggest. It is not demand, but suggest. So we're going to be somewhat polite here. But what do you think is the general purpose of this letter? What is it trying to do? Now, you may think request is appropriate. You could argue it's a request letter. I would argue it's more of a complaint letter, but the language that we use is not going to be quite so forceful as if we were complaining to a shop. There is a mild inconvenience here, but we also are these people's or this person's neighbor. And so we don't want to cause unnecessary antagonism. We don't want to cause an unnecessary sense of conflict. So we have to be kind of polite as well. So it's quite tricky, this one, to find the right tone, but we're going to work out how to do that as we go through it. But before we do that, we have to think about our plan as always. So let's get these paragraphs down here. So first paragraph, as usual, we're going to write about the purpose. And in the second paragraph, we're looking at that bullet point, introduce yourself, give details of the noise. So what are some key points we want to make here? It's nice that they're separated into 2 directives. So the first one is to introduce yourself. Let's just make the point that we just moved here. So recently moved, just moved. That can also be used in a semi-formal setting. And just moved here. And another very important point, we are below the other apartment. The other apartment is above us. As I said, that's very important to talk about, so we'll make sure to put it in the plan so we don't forget. And then we're giving details of the noise. So what is the noise? Maybe it's a piano that the apartment dweller is playing that's causing us some grief. So we can move into the third paragraph plan. Describe the problems it's causing you and your family. Okay, so family, so I have a wife and some children potentially, so I'm imagining that the time that the person plays the piano is in the evening, perhaps when we're trying to put the children to bed. So getting the children to bed, and then you've also got to take into account the problems it's causing you. So that's the problem it's causing your family, but what's the problem it's causing you? Well, that in itself leads to issues with our own sleep, because we have to wait later to get to sleep because they won't be able to fall asleep, and this also causes stress. So a lot of things going on here. We can use some nice sequencing language. Now the fourth paragraph suggests what action the person could take. What can we say? Well, we can say what we don't want them to do. We're not, as I said before, we're not trying to be too forceful in our language. We don't want to cause any difficulties between the two of us. So let's say that we're not asking them to quit altogether. So don't quit your practice altogether, but maybe instead they could just move their practice by an hour. So move practice to a different time. I'm just going to write move practice time just so that those words are down. Of course, we'll turn them into a proper sentence later, but it's just important to get the ideas down. All right, that's our plan. Let's leave that on the screen, and we're going to come over and write our response, write our letter. So, dear, let's say, now someone that we don't really know, maybe we know the person's name from the letter boxes downstairs in the flat. So I'm just going to go with something like this: Dear Mr. Addington, rather than Dear Pete. You could go with something like Dear, I wouldn't go with Dear Pete, maybe Dear Peter. You could go with someone's first name potentially, but because you've only just moved into the apartment, you're probably not on a first name basis with this person. And so although it's a semi-formal letter, sometimes we can write first names. In this case, I wouldn't. You need to take it on a case-by-case basis, and that's the reason here. We don't know them probably, so we're just going for the last name. A bit more polite, even though it's not a formal letter, it's a polite semi-formal letter. And we want to indicate the reason for writing immediately, so I am writing to. Notice here, instantly, I have dropped the contractions. No, I'm writing to, but we're separating the contraction. I am writing to. We shouldn't really be writing in contractions when we have a semi-formal letter, and certainly not in a formal letter. So I am writing to, let's say, bring your attention to. Maybe this is a little bit over formal and we don't want to be too forceful, as I've said before, so we can add a nice adverb in here. I'm writing to kindly bring your attention to, particularly because it's a complaint letter and we don't want to cause any distress, we don't want to cause a fight. I'm writing to kindly bring your attention to an issue of noise, nice and simple, coming from your apartment. All of the main details we can come to a bit later. So I am writing to kindly bring your attention to an issue of noise coming from your apartment. Right, now we can move into the second paragraph. We've just moved, the apartment's below, there's something on with the piano. Let's turn all of that into a paragraph. So first of all, I want to make it very clear, my family and I, get that there right off the bat, have just moved into, nice expression here, into the building. You could say into our apartment, but moved into the building immediately creates this sense of a shared space. So you're trying to put yourself on the same level as the recipient, create a kind of a sense of friendship here. It's just a little bit more polite to go in this direction. Also notice I'm still using the word just. The word just needs a little bit more care when you move to semi-formal and formal letters, but here just means recently, just moved in, recently moved in into the building, and we are, as my plan says, living in the apartment right below your own. Let's say that. So we're immediately below. We're not two flats below, but we're right below the other person's apartment. So we're being specific here, as specific as we can. Now we want to talk about details of the noise. I'm going to start with a however. This works well in a semi-formal letter. It would look a little bit strange in an informal letter, but now we're into semi-formal letters. We can use expressions like however. However, due to, or because of, either one is fine, due to this close proximity, so that we're nearby, that may look a little bit formal, but it's okay here. Due to this close proximity, we are, let's say, well within hearing range. So there's a nice collocation, hearing range. So we can hear something. We're in the range that it's possible to hear a particular noise of your, and we got piano there, so let's say piano practice sessions. And again, some nice collocations, practice sessions, so showing off the lexical resource. Okay, that's fine for this paragraph. It's not as long as often some of our paragraphs are, but I think it's okay. I think most of the content is going to take place in the next paragraph. So we're talking about the problems that this noise is causing us and our family. Now, first thing I want to say is that we again want to stress the point that this is not usually going to be a problem for us. We have no problem with the piano for the piano's sake. There is no natural aversion to piano. So let's just say something like this. This would be of no concern. Normally, this would be of no concern. So usually you wouldn't have to worry about this. This would be of no concern. But in this case, you can write in this case if you want to, you don't have to. But the problem is that. The problem is that these sessions, now notice the referencing here, these referring back to these sessions that I've just spoken about. The referencing is important for coherence and cohesion. These sessions always seem to take place. Now, if this is a formal letter, you might use the verb occur. But as it's a semi-formal letter, we can use an expression like take place, just as we are, let's say, attempting. You could also go with trying. Either one is fine. The nice thing about semi-formal letters is there is some flexibility here. You're not quite as confined to one category. Just as we are attempting to put our children, let's be more specific here. Let's give a little bit of detail. Our two young children to bed between, again, we want to be specific so that we can give them an indication as to how they can change later on. Put our two young children to bed between 7 and 8 p.m. And I think adding that young children there is important because older children wouldn't go to bed quite so early. Also notice the expression here, put someone to bed. Again, you're showing your lexical resource here. So we are attempting to put our two young children to bed between 7 and 8 p.m. Now let's talk about sleep and stress and do so in a nice complex grammatical construction. The not only but also construction. I want you to notice the grammar that appears here. Not only is this causing the children difficulties, it's causing them difficulties with getting to sleep. That's the first part. Then we add a comma and we write but also, or in this case, but it is also, because we're changing the subject in this case, not always going to happen, but it is also creating stress for me and my wife. Now, what you should notice about the grammar here is that when we follow not only, we invert the subject and the verb. So not this is causing, but is this causing? It's not a question, it's just what happens when we follow on from not only. but then notice that when we get to the conjunction but, we go back to normal and we have subject and verb. And we almost always want to write an also in there, that not only but also, not only but it is also. So a nice bit of grammatical range here, as well as putting some important details that help us to cover the task requirements and what the problems it's causing, not just your family, but also you. So we've very clearly written that here. Me, we've got my wife, and we've got the children as well. So then we can move on to the fourth paragraph, suggest what action the person could take. And here is where we can start to think about specific complaint vocabulary. We've already used a little bit when we've written, I am writing to kindly bring your attention to. That's a nice way of politely bringing up a complaint to someone. Now we can use the complaint language in the sense of suggesting a solution. But first of all, let's talk about what we don't want the recipient to do. We don't feel that we need to demand them to stop. So let's just talk about that first. Nice expression here. By no means. So in no way. I am really not suggesting this. By no means. Now notice here the grammar. So just like with not only, when we follow from by no means, we invert again. Subject verb flipped around, we have am I, not I am. So not by no means I am suggesting, but by no means am I suggesting. Not a question, it's just what happens when we follow from by no means. So by no means am I suggesting that you quit your piano practice altogether. I'm not saying that whatsoever. That's what that really means. And now we can move into the suggestion language for the complaint. Rather, it would be a huge help if, or let's be more specific, to my family, if you could. It would be, now notice the grammar here as well, we've got a second conditional. It would be a huge help if you could. This can also work for request letters as well if it feels like a big favor, but if it's a complaint letter, we can also use it if we want to be very polite. So it would be a huge help to my family if you could, what are we doing? Move the practice. If you could just, again, simply, it shouldn't be much effort. We're asking for just a small favor here. Just move your practice back by an hour or two. So change the time to a time when we're not putting our children to bed by an hour or two. Okay. Again, we got some nice informal vocabulary there. Just move it back. Nice and colloquial. It would be a huge help. Notice the noun being used here instead of the verb. It demonstrates your strong language command. And that should be enough, I think, as well. Now we want to finish this. This letter again on a polite tone. We're going to be living right near this person, so we want to maintain good relations. So we'll go with a thank you for your understanding, and a little bit more. And please, nice phrasal verb here. We can use this kind of phrasal verb in a semi-formal letter if it feels appropriate. And please drop by if you would like to discuss this in person. So this language looks a little bit more on the formal level. This language looks a little bit more on the informal. Don't just include some informal language and some formal language and just scatter it about. That will create an inconsistent tone. But there is a nice balance here of the two, and neither one of which looks excessively informal or excessively formal, and that's what you want to try and achieve here, something in the middle. Please drop by if you would like to discuss this in person. You could also say feel free to drop by as well, that would also be okay. And then I think we can just end the letter here. You might end with best regards rather than just best. Best is more informal, best regards for semi-formal. I'm going to go with a kind regards. And then I'm going to use my first name. We're going to use the name Eric here. And we're also going to add a second name as well so that they know what the full name of the final name of the family is as well, so they know that we are the Fullers, so Eric Fuller. And so although we've only written the recipient's second name, we're trying to create an element of friendliness here by also including our first name. So hopefully if the recipient were to write back, he would also include his first name, and we could sort of instigate a good relation with that person. So here is a model answer for a semi-formal letter focusing on sort of a complaint, but being very polite about it, turning it more into a request. Hopefully that was useful. You got some good vocabulary out of it. Follow on with the gap fill exercise as usual, and I will see you in the next lecture.